If you don't know what you own, you're not going to be able to keep it. My mom, who had worked her whole life as a teacher, she had all her savings in the bank, and overnight during that 2008 period, they took 13 zeros off the dollar. And so her savings went to zero and everybody else's who had money. And of course, it affects the people with the least the most because they can not afford anything. And there was actually starvation at that time. I mean, I didn't even know about the compound interest. Whereas I'm coming to that stage of life. I know you guys are just starting out and it's different. But if you start out in you like you are doing in your college years and in your 20s, I mean, I didn't even know about the compound interest in 2020 when we had that crazy time and, crazy money printing again. And then I'm like, wow, it's happening here just like it happened there.
Welcome back to the Orange Peel Podcast. I'm your host, Nicki, and today's guest has such a unique story. I'm here with Paula Iverson, the host of the Bitcoin Edge podcast, and she grew up in Zimbabwe and has literally lived through real inflation. Not just the kind that we've been talking about where our grocery bills or our rent has been going up, but real hyperinflation. We're going to talk all about her story, how she found Bitcoin, and how she's orange pilling the internet and her own family, starting with her niece, who's Gen Z, just like me. All of this is just so she can help us prepare for a better financial future. So, Paula, thank you so much for coming on today. I am so excited to get to know you a little bit more and have this conversation.
I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
All right. So let's start from the very beginning, before the Bitcoin, before the podcast. Let's just talk about, what was money like for you growing up?
So, as you mentioned, I grew up in Zimbabwe. Most of my childhood, the money was pretty stable. It only started going into hyperinflation as I became a teenager. And at that time, I did what you did and I moved across the world to go to university in the US. I came here on a tennis scholarship and I wasn't thinking much about money back then. I I didn't get a great education from my family about money. They were very helpful and good to me, but I didn't really learn much about money growing up as a kid. In fact, my mom said when I left to the States, she said, go to the US and find a rich man who's taller than you. And yes, she was joking, but that is kind of the idea back then. So it took me a long time to figure out what was going on about money. And in 2008 was when I really noticed. I saw what happened in the US with the big crash here. And in Zimbabwe, that is when the $1 trillion note came about in that hyperinflation. And I didn't understand that they were printing money much quicker than they should have been. And I've since learned about that, but I didn't understand why there was nothing on the shelves. There was, my dad had suitcases of money at home that he would make at work. And he would say, let's go quickly back and buy whatever we can because it, things went up by the hour. So I did experience that. I did see suitcases of cash. And their answer back then was to put money in property, real estate, where possible, and businesses. And some people were smart enough to store it in the US dollar and overseas when possible. But that was my brief introduction to money and just didn't seem right.
I think I was around 11 or 12 years old when I first learned about what was happening over in Zimbabwe. And what happened was my dad had this coworker who had taken a trip there. And my dad comes back from work one day with a $10 trillion note. And he shows it to my brother and I, and at the time, my brother was like 9 years old, I was like 12-ish. So we saw this and we were like, "Oh my goodness, like we're rich. This is $10 trillion." And my dad sits us down and he's like, "Yeah, this says $10 trillion, but actually this is what happens when you have a government that continues to just print more money. The the price of just a loaf of bread can start to reach in the trillions." And I think that was just earth-shattering for me to hear about. And I grew up in the US, so we never experienced this kind of hyperinflation, but just the fact that this is happening in the world. And it's something that we never really get taught in school. We never really talk about what happened, in Zimbabwe, what happened in Cambodia or Indonesia. Um, at all, and it's just something that you learn about, on your own or through your family. So, what I wanna ask you is, did that experience change how you viewed the government or, central banks, or just the idea of trust in the financial system altogether?
Yes, I think it did. My my mom, who had worked her whole life as a teacher, she had all her savings in the bank, and overnight during that 2008 period, they took 13 zeros off the dollar, and so her savings went to zero and everybody else's who had money. And of course, it affects the people with the least the most because they can not afford anything. And there was actually starvation at that time. And I started helping with that because that just didn't make sense that people were starving and it just didn't feel right. So I started getting into charity work, but I also realized that just giving people money was not going to help that much either. And so this has been a long, slow journey for me to learning about money and good practices with money first, and then the mistrust in banks would definitely was there. So from that period on, nobody keeps their money in the bank in Zimbabwe unless it's a business account and you need it for business purposes. But nobody stores their money in the bank anymore. People don't really trust authority there and in many other countries, as we know. But yeah, I definitely that planted the seed for me to have less trust and also, yeah, just to think, how is this possible? And this doesn't seem right.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds just really wild, just really surreal. And I think most of Gen Z, we're so young that we only know inflation as these headlines. We only know it as our rent increasing by like 10% a year or something. But, hearing you actually live it, is this how you sort of connected, or how you connected to Bitcoin, or how you eventually came across Bitcoin, or is that a different story?
It's a little bit different. So I've
Okay.
been living in the US for a long time, and I decided I was going to go back to Zimbabwe in 2015. And right at the very end of my trip there, I went to a talk on Bitcoin. And I thought it sounded I was one of the people I thought it sounded very interesting right away. I didn't think, "Oh, this is a scam," because they did start out saying inflation, and and that really spoke to me because I'd seen it. So, I didn't understand Bitcoin, but I did like what they were saying, that, inflation is stealing from us, and Bitcoin is a hedge against that. They said many things I don't remember, but I do remember at the end of it, they said, and there's Ethereum, and that's even better. So that would have been a, red flag had I known any more. But it was the first touch point for me. It planted the seed. I then invested in this multi-level marketing company and I never got my money back. So I learned the hard way. um, because even then I didn't really understand money. And it was only when I moved back to the US and I thought, okay, now I'm getting a little older I'm going to have to retire at one point, and I haven't really saved enough for retirement. So I'm getting a little older. I'm going to have to retire at one point, and I haven't really saved enough for retirement. So, and how that's such a valuable thing to start saving young. But I did learn close to my 30s, and I just didn't save enough. And so I started going down that rabbit hole and learning to pay myself first and do a lot more of, understanding how markets work and all of that. And that led me back to Bitcoin in 2020 when we had that crazy time and, crazy money printing again. And then I'm like, wow, it's happening here just like it happened there. Not on the same scale, but yeah, that's when I noticed.
Yeah, inflation, it really is a global problem. I mean, it happens in every single country in the world, and it happens through every generation. I think you can pick up any person and they would be able to tell you a story about inflation because it really is as widespread as we think it is. And I just think it's crazy that it's so normalized. I think before you start learning about Bitcoin, you just know that 2 to 3% inflation it's going to happen because that's just the way it is, right? I take some econ classes in my college, and a lot of my professors will say, yeah, 2 to 3%, that's kind of the golden target. That's what we want to hit every year to keep money flowing in the economy. But that really just isn't the case, and I think Bitcoin does a really wonderful job at teaching you that through, a variety of different lenses, and there are many, many different paths that lead to Bitcoin, but, we all end up in the same endpoint of understanding that inflation just isn't right. It's not the natural state of the world, as Jeff Booth likes to say. So was there something that you learned about, while you were studying Bitcoin that really just shook your worldview or really just made it kind of click for you?
I think when I started learning about what money was, I didn't know anything about the history of money. I think one thing that really shook my world was when I learned that we had adopted the Keynesian economics in universities across the world. And there was this other school, Austrian economics, that seemed to make more sense when I was reading about it. And yet we had not used that way. And it's not even taught in schools. So I thought, well, and the reason why is that because the man who invented Keynesian economics was very connected with the government at the time, and it was their only way to keep this money scheme going with our debt-based system. And like you mentioned, 2 to 3% inflation is absolutely needed to keep this scheme going. So that was a big wake-up call for me when I realized, well, if we've been taught this in schools across the world, what else are we being told that isn't true? So that just made me go down the rabbit hole deeper.
To provide some context, could you maybe sum up some of the things that you learned in the Austrian economic school of thought?
So I haven't studied it like many people have, but I know that they believe that sound money and printing printing money is not needed for a successful society. So yeah, the Austrian economics just made a lot more sense to me. Like I mentioned, I didn't really study it. I read Seyfedin's book, the Bitcoin Standard, and that's the first time I heard of that. And yeah, but it just made a lot of sense that the way that our world is run is, like you mentioned, deflation is the natural state of the free market, and that we've never seen a free market. That's another thing that really shook my world, that we have never lived in a totally free market. I know when we were on the gold standard, they couldn't just print money because they had to have gold to match the amount of money they printed. But when we got taken off the gold standard in 1971, then that gave li- gave governments license to print money as much as they wanted. And yeah, all of that. I didn't learn any of that in school. I didn't learn any of that in college. Yeah, I wasn't an economics major, but I think it would be useful to know. um, and yeah, I've got a much better education on my own learning Bitcoin and Bitcoin books.
It's really interesting to see how, people come across Bitcoin and just through all the different ways and all the different things that they study because as I mentioned earlier, it's all the same core learnings and one of the most important things that you learn is the history of money. I learned about, what happened in 1971 very recently. It was maybe like 3 or 4 months ago, and I made a video on it because I was just so completely just astonished by the fact that somebody woke up one day and basically decided, "Yeah, you know what? We're gonna change the entire system and just be able to run the printer anytime we want." And it really all roads do lead back to 1971. All roads do lead back to the fact that we don't have a sound money in the first place. And I think that's a very special angle to discuss further because it shows Gen Z that, everything that we're experiencing is in fact a historical monetary problem. It's not something that's new for our generation. It might be worse. We might be feeling it at, higher rates at a younger age, but it all leads back to the fact that the system was rigged for us from the very beginning. And, this is the same case for even like Gen X and the millennials and the boomers. It's always been rigged. So as someone who has seen the worst of fiat money, how would you help Gen Z appreciate what Bitcoin is and what it stands for?
That is a great question. how would I how would I help Gen Z appreciate Bitcoin and what it stands for? I think I would start with what you mentioned. I would start with the history of money, learning what money is. I I have been working on orange pilling my niece for a while, as you know. So this does come up. And I do talk about inflation a lot because everybody sees the problem. Everybody sees that things are going up. So maybe not the whole problem, but they see part of the problem. They see that things are going up. It's just that Gen Z also thinks that that's normal because that's all they've seen. They see things not going up as much as some people, but yeah, things are going up. You've mentioned that with coffee and rent, and yes, it is, but it's getting across to Gen Z that that is not normal, and that what sound money really is. Money should be a store of value as well as a unit of account and a medium of exchange. And I know I only thought it was a medium of exchange. I didn't know that money should store value. And I think just hearing about that, what I do, my time and my energy is what when I give my time and my energy, I get rewarded with money. And if I'm getting rewarded in a currency that's going down in value, well, how valuable is that? And how can any Gen Z be able to save for a house if their money is constantly going down in value? Or how can they save for anything? And I can see why it's such a big struggle. I I'd love to know where do you start out, you know, with Gen Z and helping them see.
I think I've also got very much of the same approach where it all starts by opening people's eyes to the fact that there is a problem, because everyone feels the effects of what's going on, but nobody can actually really tell you what's going on for the most part. I mean, to put things into perspective, always knew that inflation was a real thing, and I always knew that money printing was happening. But if you had spoken to me this time last year, I wouldn't be able to tell you why money printing was a bad thing. I mean, as bad and as stereotypical as it sounds, I very much, didn't understand why we couldn't just print more money to pay off our debt. Why did that mean that the value of the dollar has to go down, right? And this is basic supply and demand stuff that you learn in Econ 101. So it should just speak to the fact that we really get no financial education in early schooling, up until we graduate high school, unless we go pursue it in college. It's possible for you to go your entire life without really understanding what money is and what's really happening with our governments and the economy. So I always start with a similar approach, where we talk about, okay, did you see the price in rent has gone up by $30 for next year? Isn't that crazy? Because the cost of living has gone up a little bit in here in Melbourne, but it's not as drastic as a $30 increase in the rent prices. And it's a bit like they know that we want to stay close to college. They know that a lot of us as international students don't really have the option to go out and rent a place or to buy a place. Like, we can't buy foreign property here in Australia. So they know that they can get away with it. And it's literally just squeezing money out wherever they can. And this is a byproduct of having a broken money. And I think you would understand that, better than I would. But tell me about your niece. How did you first bring up Bitcoin to her?
So I kind of forced Bitcoin upon her. Her dad gave her a gold coin for her 18th birthday. And I happened to have it because my mom gave it to me by mistake. So I had it, and he gave it to her. And I said to her, I am going to put your gold coin in Bitcoin. And if Bitcoin goes down, I will give you the value of your gold coin anytime you want it. You can have the value, whatever it is in gold. But if Bitcoin goes up, you win. So I did that for her. And Bitcoin was around 30,000 at the time. And today it's around 110 or so. Gold, yes, we know gold has doubled this year, but it's still, Bitcoin has had a better return since I put it in for her. Plus, for your generation, it's digital, money. It's time for us to move on. We have been using the same system and the old system for so long. It is time that we really upgraded and got away from credit cards and all of that stuff, because we have a much better system that's Bitcoin. But so that's how I first got her into Bitcoin. And then I've been trying to get her to add to it because now she's seen the return, but I cannot just get her to that savings, regular savings. And I don't know how Gen Z does that, because when I was that age, I wasn't thinking about buying a house. I wasn't thinking about saving for retirement. I knew to save for something I wanted, like a car, but then you're going to spend it, right? So I think something valuable to teach people is, if you're going to pay yourself first, that 10 or 20%, that's for you for the long term, not to buy a car or not to buy a house, to have something extra. And that would be best in Bitcoin. So I got my niece in that, and I have added when I've had given her gifts and things. But when I ask her, what do you want for Christmas? Well, the answer was a new iPad, not Bitcoin. So I get it. I get it. I wanted everything at that age. And I really think you're unusual, Nicki. And I know some of your friends are. I know you've got great parents. But yeah, I don't know how to get my niece to save in Bitcoin. It's really not my job, right? I'm just the ant. But I can give it as a gift, and I can I can plant the seed. And even I have another niece who's 8 years old, the next generation probably, and she's like, "Oh yeah, you like Bitcoin." She knows I like it, but she doesn't. I've taken her one of those kids' books, and she hasn't read it with me yet, but that's the next step.
That is the next step. And it's interesting that you bring up this point of saving because it really is a problem in Gen Z. It's not just your niece, it's all of us. Before I started learning about Bitcoin, I wasn't really thinking about saving either, let alone, buying a house, buying a car. All of that was kind of just like, oh, I can worry about it after I graduate college. But the reality is you can't worry about it after you graduate college. You pretty much should start worrying about it now because what we've already seen home prices go up exponentially from like with COVID happening and then what happened with the economy in like 2022, 2023. It's been a crazy few years that Gen Z has been coming of age in. And it has instilled this financial nihilism in us. I mean, I talk to my friends, and a lot of them don't have a savings fund. They don't have an emergency fund because they genuinely don't see the point. And one of the reasons they don't see the point is because they're like, oh, what's going to happen? Like, nothing's ever going to happen. It's going to be fine. But also, just this idea of high time preference, right? And wanting to get returns out of your money now. They would rather take what they've earned from their jobs and go on a shopping spree than to put it in, let alone put it into Bitcoin, but just to put it in a savings account or invest it in an index fund. So it really is half of the battle. I like to think of it as just getting Gen Z to understand that you need to be thinking about your future. You need to be thinking about how you're going to afford a house. How are you going to afford a car or a family if that's what you choose to do in further down the line. But I really do think Bitcoin totally like changes your mindset because as I mentioned, I've only really been studying it this year. But recently my friends and I we wanted to go to a music festival and we have to buy tickets for it and the tickets are about 550 Australian dollars. So it's an expensive thing, but it's a 4-day long festival and it would be so much fun to go. But I'm kind of like I was like, should I go or should I just put this amount of money into Bitcoin? Because that's what I've been doing as of late. It's just been whatever I can save, it just goes directly into Bitcoin. And it's like once you move into understanding what Bitcoin is, you almost don't want to spend the money anyway. And then it's like the whole thing of like, yeah, you have to have balance and like enjoy your life and experience. But it's crazy to see just how understanding one thing can completely flip your mindset and who you are as a person.
At least
So
thinking about it, right? You're thinking about it. I love that idea of balance. I do think we need balance because you are so young. And if it's something that you're really going to miss doing and you're going to be the only one not doing it, yeah, that would be hard. At the same time, it's so wonderful that you think about it. You have a low time preference already. And I just want to say, if I had started and knew what I was doing, had an education, and then started saving early, you can see how well the people who start young or whose parents just happen to put some stocks away and, then they have it forever. But that's not enough anymore. Stocks, you never know how they're going to do. And, as you and I know, Bitcoin is a whole new system and protocol and way of living. So, but just from my experience, when I was 28, I bought, say, 10 of the top stocks. And I thought that's what I needed to do, but I didn't understand enough about stocks. So when the stock market crashed, I freaked out, lost half my money, and didn't know what I was doing. So probably sold at the bottom, like most people do. The statistics show that most people buy high, sell low. And so I learned once you have knowledge, of it, then you can make an educated decision. But Bitcoin is just so much easier. You don't have to learn who the CEO is and what the company is doing. Bitcoin basically appreciates at 45% a year because of our crazy money printing. And even though I don't focus so much on the price, that's just what it is. So it's the best thing to save in for the long term. And I think what you said, having the balance, because nobody knows if there's tomorrow, right? Nobody knows any age. I mean, I'm a very positive person, but I don't think, and I don't think of the worst. But nobody knows. So I do like to take the trips, but I also like to have a certain amount I save in Bitcoin to find that balance. And of course, keeping it safe is important.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you put it so well, right there. It is all about balance. But, half the battle really is education, as you were mentioning. A lot of people, they just don't know about stocks, and so that's where you get those statistics. Same thing, people don't know about Bitcoin, so they view it as, fake internet money or a scam or like it's only for crypto bros, and it's not for everyone. But that's just not true. And I think you do a really, really wonderful job at pushing this narrative forward with your podcast, with the Bitcoin Edge. So, I mean, let's talk about that. What inspired you to start your podcast?
So I've been in the fitness industry most of my life. After I played tennis, I played a little bit of professional tennis, then I went into fitness, and I just got tired of it because I was getting paid by the hour. Another big no-no, what I learned later in life. I learned that I have to either leverage my time if I really want to do well, but getting paid by the hour is one of the big no-nos if you want to really go far, at least earning fiat. So anyway, I love that. I liked helping people get fit and in shape. But I learned one thing about that. You can be fit and not healthy. So then I became obsessed with holistic health and learned everything I could about that. And I also worked in that, loved it. But after a long time, I got a bit tired of it. So I went into real estate. I still use it on myself, but most people just want to lose weight. And if we go down that rabbit hole, if you're eating conventional, poor quality food, it's very difficult to lose weight. And again, nobody really wanted to learn exactly what they're doing to our food. So I learned the fiat food, before I learned about Bitcoin. But anyway, then I went into real estate and it wasn't my passion. So I was doing something that I didn't love. I'm still doing it and I do like it. I like many parts of it, but it's not my passion. So once I had been studying Bitcoin in 2020, I thought, wow, my time is valuable and I am spending time working for fiat that I'm not enjoying 100%, and I'm getting paid in money that goes down in value. As Jack Mallers says, it can be anything that can be printed, is not the best thing to work for. So I decided to start the podcast, keep going with the real estate because I wanted to talk to Bitcoiners. And I wanted to learn more. I'm not the most techie person. I'm also not at the age where you think you would start a podcast, but I decided to be brave because I just love talking to Bitcoiners. And none of my friends want to talk about Bitcoiners. They all still think it's risky and don't understand it because nobody takes the time. So I decided I'd start the podcast, and it's been a wonderful experience. And I can only say that Bitcoiners are wonderful people.
I really do admire your bravery and just, how you went for it and started it because this really it's an intergenerational thing. I mean, I experienced the same problems that you experienced trying to talk to your friends and trying to talk to people about Bitcoin. So just the community that we've built here as Bitcoiners, and more so everyone that has come before Gen Z, it's been really really great, and it's really interesting how you brought up the point about how you've always been into fitness, and then you got into holistic health because this is something that Bitcoiners do talk about a lot. I think Bitcoin does a great job at not just improving your financial life, but also teaching you about, what are the right things to put in your body? What how much should you be going out in a day? How important it is to go outside and get vitamin D, et cetera, et cetera. Spend time with your family. Really live the way that I think humans were meant to live and not just be a slave to the fiat system. So, how did you find your voice as a host? I think this is a little bit different, but especially as one of the few women in the Bitcoin space, how has it been? How has the whole experience of having a podcast and interviewing people and talking to people been?
Yeah, I have to say I've really enjoyed it, and most of my guests have been men. I have spoken to quite a few women, but often women say no, unless they've been in Bitcoin a while. So more men tend to say yes. I love talking to them too. They're very knowledgeable. And I know that I don't know everything. I've read, I've studied, I listen to everyone's podcast. I loved your latest one on I love that you're doing it solo also and educating people on self-custody, and that was wonderful. So I listen to everybody, and I don't know that I've completely found my voice. I was going to speak more about the spiritual side, and now I've gone another way. I love the spiritual side of Bitcoin, just that it has a bigger meaning and can change so many more things than just our finances. But so I do bring that question in a little bit, but it's not been the main focus. And I've spoken to a couple of Gen Zs, including you. I spoke to Helston the other day, spoke to Ella Huff, spoken to, a couple of people in Africa who are younger, and they're going full stream ahead there. And yeah, it's just such a global thing. I originally started it because I didn't know how to reach my friends and my family. And I just thought if I can't reach the people I want to, I'm sure that other people will enjoy listening to regular people on their Bitcoin journeys. And that's pretty much my voice, is just hearing different people's journeys from all over the world of all different ages and all different people, and how we all have more in common really than we don't.
Absolutely. And I think it's so cool to hear you talk about how Bitcoin has kept you humble and just consistently learning, because it really is like a gold mine for knowledge. I mean, it never ends. It just keeps going and keeps going, which I think is one of the best parts about Bitcoin. As soon as I think I know something, I discover another fact, another stat where it's like, oh, but I haven't considered this perspective, which is just so, I mean, stimulating to think about. It's really it's the best part about Bitcoin, and being a Bitcoiner. It keeps your mind sharp. And so you've done a ton of interviews and you've spoken to some really, really cool people. Do you have one guest or kind of story that's like that changed your perspective? Maybe an interview where you like thought about it afterwards and you were like, wow.
Well, I would have to say Jeff Booth. Jeff Booth, every time I speak to him, he changes my perspective. And why I say him too is because when I was just starting out, I only had about 70 followers, and Jeff Booth said yes. And I couldn't believe he said yes, but I see him saying yes to everybody who asks. And we're just so lucky to have somebody like him in the space, because I think he is a visionary. And his concepts are still hard for me to grasp sometimes. And some of the things that he says is when we price Bitcoin in fiat terms, we're making that system stronger. And when we invest in the stock market and when we live in that world completely, we are making that system stronger. And so part of, you mentioned my voice, is to get that message out, is that we need to move our time and our energy over into the Bitcoin world rather than the fiat world. And if I don't do it myself and practice what I preach, then how can I talk about it, right? So I am moving my time and my money over to the Bitcoin world. And I have a list here somewhere where I price in Sats because I I want to get better at that. And yeah, it's easy to price a house in Sats or in Bitcoin because that's coming down. But yeah, just to know that 1,000 Sats is uh, that $100. Yeah, I'm still learning, but yeah, I think, he really, when he came and was so humble with his knowledge and with his, information and generosity of time, that really spoke to me. So, there have been many wonderful guests. I've had so many wonderful guests. I've read their books, like Larry Lepard and James Lavish and people from all over the world. Some of my most interesting people don't always get the most views, but they have amazing stories. That's my fault. I'm not very good with thumbnails and the algorithm. I do have help with an editor who helps from time to time, but yeah, I just think Jeff Booth will always be the message because nobody else is so consistent with that, you know, the natural state of the free market is deflation. And just to keep repeating that over and over again. And yeah, I'm going to be interviewing him again in November. And, I think when you say that, all of us Bitcoiners now know the natural state of the free market is deflation. But since we've never seen it, how can everybody else get there? It's just a slow journey of learning, and yeah, there are many ways to learn.
And it's a difficult concept to wrap your head around at first as well. I think I had some trouble understanding deflation and just understanding that, as technology and efficiency does improve, the price of things should be going down. And intuitively, it doesn't make sense, but then you connect it to things like TVs. TVs are a deflationary market, and it's really one of the only deflationary markets that we have, but it's a pretty, well-known, widespread one. And I mean, it's people like Jeff Booth, people who really have the strongest conviction in the Bitcoin space that make the most waves and really have the most inspiring conversations. I'm having him on end of November, and I'm like actively like watching his other interviews and studying his book and trying to come up with a list of questions that I do want to talk to him about. And I think it is nerve-wracking to think about, but I'm so excited to have that conversation and meet him and get to know him. So before we wrap this up, I want to, give you a space to sort of summarize things, maybe, speak to Gen Z a little bit. So my next question is, when you look back at countries like Argentina or Zimbabwe, what do you think that they teach us about Bitcoin that matters?
So, what do I think that countries with hyperinflation can teach us about Bitcoin? Yeah. Well, I think I think it's one of the questions that I've asked many of my guests is, yes, everybody thinks that inflation can happen over there, but it can never happen in the US or Australia or Germany. And what they tell me is, yes, it can happen. it's happening slower. So those countries are teaching us what can happen when you are furthest away from the money printer, because we all know the US is the global reserve currency. So even though they print a lot, they're printing less than many of these other countries. And that is what happens when it just shows us how when you speed up the money printing, that is what happens. And when you have something like Bitcoin, what I love about Bitcoin, one Bitcoin is always one Bitcoin, because we only have 21 million. Many of those are already lost. So it's actually even less. And one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin means that they can never print more. And so the value of Bitcoin is always going to stay at one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. But if you have a Zimbabwe dollar or an Argentinian peso, we don't ever know what the denominator is. Bitcoin is 21 million. We have no idea. We have no idea even with the US dollar. It's just that it's happening slower. So that's where you get that analogy of the frog in the boiling water. It doesn't realize that it's boiling because it's only 2 or 3% a year, which I'm in the US and I can tell you it's not 2 or 3% a year. My goods are up 30%, especially, organic food. So yeah, I think it's those are just like canaries in the coal mine. They are telling us what can happen when it's sped up and governments print too much. And Bitcoin, the first protocol, the first invention that has something that is limited in value. And we as Bitcoiners see the value, and it's growing in adoption. It's growing, and it's people who adopt Bitcoin tend to get happier. They tend to get ahead. And when you start saving in Bitcoin, then you have more time to think about what you really want to do with your life, because now you have your financial future in a much better place than if you are saving in these currencies, any currency that is being printed, and they all are. So, gold is the old way, and even that's been mined. But Bitcoin is for the Gen Zs, right? I mean, it's made for you, and um, that's why we need you to keep getting the word out, because it's your generation that's going to make it happen.
You're so right. I mean, you're absolutely right, and I don't think I could have put it into better words. Bitcoin really is. It's for Gen Z, and it's the best thing for Gen Z right now. So, last question before we start to wrap things up is, what's your just last message to Gen Z? Your overall message. I mean, this could be Bitcoin related, or maybe not Bitcoin related. Just anything that you want to get out there.
Yeah, I would say to Gen Z is, yes, it's a great time to be your age and to enjoy life. But looking back, for me, if I had just even saved a little bit, if I had saved in gold, or you guys now have Bitcoin, if just even 5-10%, because yeah, you've got a long life ahead of you. And yeah, I think it's really important to enjoy life and have fun. But even that, if I had known just to have a little bit of savings ahead, could have made such a big difference in the amount of stress I have, in the amount of just knowing that I can do what I love. I know that many people in college and in life go into professions that they think they have to do. But when you have a financial backing behind you, you can truly do what you love. And it doesn't take that much, just saving 5 or 10% of anything extra you get, even if it's just Christmas presents or gifts. It can make a big difference in the long run, especially what we know about Bitcoin. And before you do that, I would say keep learning about Bitcoin. Because if you don't know what you own, you're not going to be able to keep it.
That's a really great quote. I'm gonna clip that and use that as promo for this episode. Honestly, I just love that. This was incredible. Thank you for coming on. I mean, hearing your story, going from Zimbabwean hyperinflation to just Bitcoin and finding peace, it really does help put things into perspective for a lot of us. And it's a reminder that, money it's supposed to serve people, not control them. You're not supposed to work for something that's consistently devaluing every year. And for everyone listening, go check out Paula's show, The Bitcoin Edge, on YouTube. And, she is just amazing. She has some really, really great videos. Go watch her video with Jeff Booth. It's incredible. And Paula, if anyone has any questions or wants to get in touch, is there someplace that they can reach you?
Absolutely. I'm on X. I'm also on Noster. And if you go to my channel, The Bitcoin Edge, you'll see my email, and absolutely get in touch and ask me any questions. And I really enjoyed being on here, Nicki. I think your message is amazing. And I see you as one of the leaders for Gen Z going forward. And I'll be watching you.
Thank you. Thank you. That means so much. Um, I'm gonna link Paula's social media in the description and put a link to her channel. So definitely go check her out. And before I forget, the last question that I like to ask everyone when they come on the show is if there is one resource, and this could be a book or a podcast, that you could recommend to someone who wanted to start learning about Bitcoin today, what would that be?
So, and I was going to ask you about what book you recommend for Gen Z. I personally have, yeah, for Gen Z. I personally, my top three books are, I really like Seb Bunny's book, The Hidden Cost of Money. I like, of course, the Bitcoin Standard, but that could be a bit dry for some people. I love Lawrence Lepard's book. Um, I've read Lynn Alden's book, Broken Money. I think I think I would probably start with The Problem, you know, probably Joe Bryan's What's the Problem? Because if you don't know the problem, you're not going to find the solution. And most people can watch a video, right? So, yeah, one of those to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, they're all great resources, and What's the Problem is probably the one that has been recommended most on this channel. I've talked about it myself. We've had Joe Bryan on and everything. It's just he did a great job. I mean, it's 40 minutes long. It's got these Pixar animated characters. It's so digestible for anyone of any age. So thank you, for recommending that. And I'm gonna add a link if you haven't already seen What's the Problem. It's probably time for you to get on that and start figuring things out. So thanks again, Paula, for coming on. And to everyone else watching this, stay curious, stay skeptical, and stay orange pilled. I'm your host, Nicki, and I'm gonna see you next time.